Welcome to the first ever Modern World History Computer Sci Chat. I'm Mr. Armstrong here along with...
Hey kids, it's Mr. Williams.
Today we're going to talk about eventually we're going to talk about the scientific revolution, but before we do that, we're going to talk about challenging pre-existing ideas and how challenging those can help kind of change things. So we'll start there. So Mr. if you want to get started with your thoughts on the question up here at the top.
Yeah, and students should already feel pretty good about this. We had an assignment yesterday about just challenging pre-existing ideas, and the assignment was to find people in today's world that is currently challenging those ideas. And I think when we look at the scientific revolution, you really have to understand and thank them for it, that they were the pioneers in really challenging pre-existing ideas, and it got the whole ball of momentum rolling, which helped create the world that we live in today.
Awesome, right? And to kind of piggyback off of what you're saying with getting the ball rolling, I'm going to point to this bowling ball or whatever it may be down here. It's if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. So, and again, that's kind of the premise and what we're going to be talking about. But before we get too far into the scientific revolution, we're going to take a little sidestep backwards here. We're going to talk about, we're going to remind you, we're talking a little bit about the Middle Ages. And, we talked about this, we learned about this in 7th grade. So the first example of challenging the authority or the pre-existing ideas is the creation of the Magna Carta. So the Magna Carta was what year was that?
I think it was 1215, if my memory serves me.
That's right, 1215, and then that puts the Black Death of bubonic plague right around the 1300s, right?
Correct, yeah.
All right, so the Magna Carta was this creation of law, if you can remember, by the barons, who now say that the king has to follow these rules of these laws, which is why he is bound by this document. It prevented him from being able to raise taxes without getting the consent of the people. It made him follow the law like everybody else. He's no longer above the law, which if we kind of think about our previous unit or previous topic, we talked about governments.
And yeah, absolutely, and a lot of governments back then was the familiar absolute monarchy, and the pre-existing idea that everyone believed in was divine right. And looking at this picture of the Magna Carta, it looks like they're really starting to challenge that pre-existing idea of divine right in 1215.
Awesome, great. And then to piggyback off of that idea of challenging, and then even challenging divine right being, through the church, through God, we'll jump with the bubonic plague here. So during the bubonic plague, the 1300s, we saw the sickness that came through that wiped out extremely large populations. And what people began to do during the Middle Ages, like they did with everything else, whenever there was a problem, they immediately ran to the church for help and for savior. Unfortunately, during the time, the church was unable to do hardly anything, anything to help save the citizens and the people who were getting sick and dying of bubonic plague. The only argument that the church could make was that the Pope had never gotten sick, but we know now that he was secluded so much that he was never going to catch any of the disease. So because of the bubonic plague, people began to question the church's ability to keep them safe. And both of these things helped lead us into the Renaissance. So we'll talk here briefly about the Renaissance, and I'll let Mr. Williams with that.
Yeah, and this is a great picture here on the right. For those who know anything about history, it's pretty much divided into 3 different time periods. Ancient history, which is, if you can underline, classical. This is where ancient history is. Their ideas were challenged and new ideas were formed. And then the next time unit after ancient history is the Middle Ages. And again, thanks to the scientific revolution, it gives way to our new and third time period, which is the class you're taking, modern world history. And that all begins, if you're following the picture on the right, it starts with the Renaissance. And the Renaissance was really kind of a rebirth of learning. And of course, we have the travel and commerce and the growth of city-states that helped the Renaissance happen. What else is going on here, Mr. Armstrong?
Well, the other thing I really want to kind of talk about as a review is this idea of humanism, is that people now have they're beginning to look at one another as important figures and not having everything, again, geared towards the church or through religion. and begin to understand that people are powerful beings and have the ability to change the world. This is when you have people like Leonardo da Vinci, Johannes Gutenberg with the printing press. These guys come into play and begin to make significant changes to the world around them and help spark more questioning and challenging that occurs.
And overall, it looks like the church is on the run and taking a hit. Their divine right with the Magna Carta has been questioned. People are questioning it with 1/3 of Europe dying during the bubonic plague and how the church didn't save them. I wonder what's going to happen during the scientific.
Let's move on and find out. So, scientific revolution, to give a little bit of the background with it, it starts with this idea of the geocentric theory, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Which was done by Ptolemy.
Yep, Ptolemy, and means Earth is in the middle, geocentric.
So you see Earth here is in the middle, and everything else is kind of revolving around it. And this is a very popular belief by the church because they're saying that everything revolves around Earth, everything revolves around what God was able to create. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, and if you guys can look at that geocentric theory image, those orbits that the planets are taking are perfect circles. And I think if you key in on the outside, that's, according to Ptolemy and the geocentric theory, that's heaven. And this is something that the church kind of reemphasized because they could make sense of it. Heaven is some place that you can't see, it's too far away, and Earth is in the middle. God created Earth. Why would Earth rotate around anything else? That pre-existing idea, and what started the scientific revolution, was Copernicus. And through his own observations, not with a telescope, with his own eyes, and where the sun rose and then where it went down, he came up with the heliocentric theory. And helio, meaning sun, put the sun in the middle of the solar system. Now, he didn't touch the orbits. He still thinks they're perfect circles, but his observations was a scary thing to do back then, was questioning the church. But he put the sun in the middle, and Earth started to rotate around the sun, which today we know is true.
So then we have Galileo, who, with the invention of his telescope, is able to see further and have a better view of all these items. And then one of the biggest contributions that he had made was determining that the planets are actually made of matter rather than light. Which, I guess the way that I would kind of explain that is that he believed the fact that you were actually able to go up and touch something rather than this idea of light. So
yeah, the geocentric theory, because I'm not sure if we touched on this, but the other planets aren't planets. Galileo proved that they are. They're matter. The geocentric theory actually came up with the idea that they're orbs of light. So Galileo really started to question that, thanks to Copernicus at the beginning, who was the first to question the church's geocentric theory. Kepler down here was the next guy in line, and he creates the elliptical orbits. And so now we're using telescopes and data, not just our eyes like Copernicus did. And so he starts making the heliocentric theory better while also poking holes at the geocentric and what the church wanted everyone to believe.
Right, awesome. Maybe the only other thing to add, just because it sparked my curiosity, was how was Galileo able to prove that these things were matter and not just light? What was he able to do with his telescope?
He was able to see the actual craters that were created by meteors.
And if it's light, there's no way that craters are created by light.
Not that I know of. If you find a way, let me know.
Awesome. Do you have anything else to add for this slide, or do you think we're good?
I think we're ready to move on.
All right. So we've got a couple of individuals here. And we're not going to go quite in depth with these guys as we did with the previous ones. We don't want to tell you everything. We're going to give you some things to look up. So I'm going to start with Margaret Cavendish. And I think the thing that's really, really fascinating and really cool about her, and especially this idea of challenging the everyday norms or the pre-existing ideas, is that for the first time you got a female who education is run by the church for so long, and females, and it's actually still this way at the Catholic Church today, females can't hold the roles of popes and archbishops and cardinals and so forth. So during a time where that grasp is really tight on everything, you've got this female who finds a way to break into education that is solely controlled by the church and by men. So she's she's a pioneer and challenges all ideas of pre-existing norms by being a female in the scientific world. And sorry, I didn't mean to talk that long, but I did. So, Williams, you're up.
It's Margaret Cavendish. She deserves it. Descartes came up with rationalism, and we have this quote, "If I think, therefore I am," and maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. He basically believed we got to question everything the church has told us because we don't know what's true and what's not. Everything should be rooted in rationalism, and it should be proved, or at least rooted in logic as well. And so I'm not going to believe it unless it seems logical to me, and some of the things that the church continues to tell us is not rooted in logic. The other thing, or other person I should say, is Bacon. And he's kind of paired with Descartes. So Descartes comes up with the idea that everything has to be logical or you shouldn't believe it, and then Bacon comes up with the method to test if it's logical or not, or if it's just correct. And I think from science class, you guys are all very familiar with the scientific method.
And I bet that you'll never forget who Bacon is, since we put a little nose on him and we're writing link on it. So, just jump up and look at the fourth person here that we have up here is Newton. And we're all familiar with, or I'm sure you've all seen, heard this idea that, he's sitting underneath a tree and an apple falls on his head, smokes him on top of the head, and that's how we come up with this idea of gravity. So, yeah, and again, you guys have kind of explored these a little bit more as we go through, but is there anything else you have to add?
I just think the one thing you should have in your head is that Copernicus was the first one, and it really everyone just starts joining in and questioning what they've been told, and it really, we get to answers, and we get to these theories and everything based in science and data, and we just start knowing more about the world we live in.
So that really does a really good job of leading us to this next question, right? Which was, what was the result of people challenging the pre-existing ideas? Well, after Copernicus, we've got other people begin to challenge more ideas, and that's one of the biggest outcomes or elements of it is that other people begin to challenge ideas, which sparks more innovation with the telescope as an example, and moving on from there. But what do you have to add?
Well, this stuff in the end promotes innovation. It changes society's norms. Overall, there's just this idea of development and progress. And, just to end this first computer science chat, I would challenge you guys to see what you can find or what needs to be challenged in today's world. I mean, the assignment yesterday, we learned about other people doing it, but what do you think needs to kind of be thrown out or at least kind of questioned? I know for me, I would question our school day. And I've talked to some students about this. I don't think we should sit in our chairs all day. It's what the pioneers did on the wild frontier. Why are we still doing that in 2016? So, but that's pretty much it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. We're signing off, and thanks for listening.